Hi, Bob. Hi, Ray.
Good morning.
Hi
Good
there.
evening.
Not sure whether there will be meeting today because Anton and Cedric, if they don't join, then we may not have the meeting.
There's Antoine.
Ah, okay. Hi, Cedric. So Hank is away and Steve is away. I'm not sure Roy will join or not. We can start in a minute.
Okay.
So yeah, Ori is also here. We can start now, I think. So I just so Ori, just to let you know, this meeting is controlled by Steve, and whenever Steve is not there, it's hard to present because I don't think host has disabled the screen sharing. So
I see. Yes.
neither you nor me can present anything. So
I'm fairly used to running links through the chat and having
yeah,
to click the links and follow along. So whatever we need to do.
yeah. So Hank had kind of roughly shared some agenda for our meeting today, which says, if I just checking Hank's email.
Yeah.
So he's saying you have we have two. One from Cedric, hacking at terminology consolidation, and one from Anton, hacking the at normative language. So I think, Anton, if I'm right, you have produced the pull request precisely for that, right?
Yes, I posted a link to the pull requests on the chat.
Maybe we can start from there. And or Cedric, you want to go first? I don't mind.
Yeah, maybe I could go first because that's going to be much faster, I think.
Okay.
So I don't have a pull request yet. I started, but as usual, there are lots of details that are puzzling in the terminology. When you look at them in particular, it's going to take me more time to reach consistency for the document. But I'm working on that. I found a couple of other issues. So let me recall what was the scope of the rewriting. So one of the goals was to remove ambiguity with the use of producers and consumers, which are too broad, and to focus on or more specific terminology, which is the one we had originally, and that is arguably more precise of issuers and verifiers. Reading the document, actually, I find other terminology that is used, although not documented in the terminology section. So in quite a few places, when we want to refer to principles that are going to rely on signed statements or transparent statements, we use third party or any other party. And so I'm wondering whether we could be using a relaying party as the broader term to capture verifiers and auditors and everyone who may depend on the statements or the artifacts, but might not necessarily verify them on their own. So, but it's a change to what we agreed last week. So I really wanted to get some early feedback on that, whether relaying party may be a useful terminology or whether it's a terrible idea.
I mean, I was thinking there were two school of thoughts. One thought in the last meeting, Hank and others thought that we should have just one high-level term like an end user or consumer, which can encompass anybody, the verifier, the
No, I
auditor.
think the decision, at least what I recall, is to really focus on verifier and to avoid something as vague as consumer. But now, if you want to keep a general category, I would argue that relaying party is better than consumer.
Yeah, I agree that relaying party is slightly kind of more abstract than consumer. Because what they were saying is these are specific roles, verifier. Otherwise, then we can, if we want to go by that route, then we have to restrict and possibly lay down all the specific roles in our ecosystem from the end user perspective, whatever we can envisage, and then kind of tightly locks it, and nobody in their system can kind of really come up with any new role because the architecture doesn't support that new role. So we thought in the guidance we can specify these specific roles in the guidance document, like there could be a verifier, there could be a auditor, there could be a monitor kind of roles.
Okay.
And
so in summary, we use the more precise term whenever we can, and so in most instances I will try to use verifier or monitor if it's not the verifier, but I will use relaying party instead of third party or at all positions where it feels more general and more global.
so will you be using term verifier in the document or auditor in the document, or you
Yes,
don't
so
want to
auditor
use?
and verifier are already defined the terminology, and I think whenever we can use them instead of a more global term, that's better. And I think that was the consensus last week. Now, in the few places where we clearly want to refer to a broader class of principles, I think relaying party is, as of today, my favorite, and I will try to use that instead of verifier, which is in some cases really feels a bit too restrictive.
Let me check. Have you defined what verifier is in the document by any role? Have we in the
Yeah, so
document?
verifier is defined in the terminology. That's the original terminology we had for.
Okay.
So verifier is this is in the terminology. The problem is not so much the terminology, but the use of the terminology in the rest of the document. So now in the terminology we have issuer and verifier, and we have auditor as well, but we don't have consumer and we don't have relaying party. What I would suggest is to keep verifier and auditor and to define them as relaying parties, but without introducing relaying party as its own terminology, more like a general concept. So that, as discussed last week, we are focusing on verifier.
Yeah, we have verifier in the document. You're right.
Yes, and I think they explained that it's a specialization of sign statement consumer is terrible, and that I will definitely get rid of. But maybe if I replace it by something, maybe instead of an entity, I will say a relaying party that consumes transparent statement, verifying their proof, etc.
But what would, if now we have a verifier and now we have an auditor, what would be a relaying party be outside of these two roles then?
Software consumer.
So I'm not going to define it as, because we are not going to say anything specific about them. So I think we don't need it to be a first class in the terminology. No, I can give you examples. So for instance, you may have users like humans who depend on using only safe artifacts, and they will be relaying parties that depend on someone verifying the transparent statement for the artifacts before they get deployed on their phone, for example, or before they eat the fish.
So how different are they from the verifier then?
So the verifier is the operator that actually gets the transparent sign statement and verifies the embodied proofs. The railing party is anyone who may suffer if there was no such verifier for the artifact it uses. So it's broader. In a sense, the relaying party relies on the artifacts, not just on the transparent statements.
I think
Yeah, I can avoid relaying party if you think that's confusing, but to me,
Yeah.
it's more precise than entity, and it's and than consumer. And also, I noticed that in quite a few places we mentioned parties or third parties or other parties in the text, and that's why I was tempted to move to relaying party. But I can be I can minimize its use if you think that if there is no consensus, it is going in the right direction. Ori, do you think relaying party is a proper terminology, or that's something that is taken in some other specs and would?
Relying party is very commonly used in the RATS world as the party
Yeah.
which is relying on the verifier to tell it whether the device or the end user is trust.
Yeah,
the
so in
anti-
that sense, it's consistent with them, but maybe you want to confirm with Hank that it's.
Well, it's also, I think relying party is owned by OAuth. Like RATS came after. Relying party was popularized by OAuth. Most people, when they hear relying party, will think of OAuth, and they'll think about the sort of verifier and the relying party maybe being synonymous with each other. RATS split that apart. And since we have the word verifier, the reason to add relying party would be that we wanted the same distinguishing characteristics that RATS has. And I don't know enough about the history of why RATS decided to split the verifier from the relying party.
No, there is a clear role. It is something that the relying party has no knowledge about how to do the verification of the attestation. So the relying party is just relying on uniform results from the verifier, whether that the entity can be trusted or not. So it's a different role. Yeah.
They just move the verification from the relying party to another service component that does the verification for the relying party.
They hardwire the fact that the relaying party is delegating the verification, which in our case I think is overkill, but it's possible to.
So what cases in SCITT rely on delegation of verification?
So I think you can always delegate verification. In SCITT, we never explicitly do it, because we focus on the verifier, not on whoever may benefit from verification.
I would say don't use the word relying party if we don't have a clear case where we say we really like delegation for this case. Adding another term.
I agree. So to be clear, I'm not going to introduce relaying party in the terminology. For that, I will stick to the plan of last week, which is we only have verifier, and everything else we try to avoid to remain precise. Now, in the text, I think, since you already mentioned parties or other parties or third party, writing third party or relaying party may be convenient. I can write third party if you think relaying party would be.
The problem is with third party is we use third party in a very loose term, Cedric. In some places, we have used third party such as reviewer or auditor, or.
I agree, but that's the goal. We want what we are trying to capture here is something that is definitely on the consumer side of transparent sign statements, and that includes verifiers and auditors and monitors. So it is deliberately vague, and because it is vague, I don't think we should make it first class in the terminology, but still use that term in the text where we feel that verifier is really too specific.
Yeah, I agree. But
so
I think we have done that already, right? There is no definition for third party in the document. It's just used as a third party, such as blah blah blah.
Right? To be clear, I don't want to make gigantic changes, but because we are removing consumer, I want to be, and in some cases it feels a bit strange to put verifier. I want to have another way around that, but yes, I'm not going to add new category in the. in the terminology. So yeah, the couple of other terms that were used. So we are sort of still using endorsement in some places instead of receipts or proof of registration. And I think we discussed endorsement, but in another sense, do we agree to avoid endorsement in the sense of proof of registration? Or do we think that's important to have?
Yeah, I'm against endorsements, by the way, because for us, endorsements have a little. I think
I
it
agree.
was.
So if you mean receipt or proof of registration, I think we should not
Yes,
endorsement. So I eliminate those instances. Yeah.
I think the endorsement was very keenly coined by, I think, Steve. He had some ideas.
No, and he was referring to them as a synonym to receipt, but or to the
Yeah.
signature in the receipt, but well, we need to make choices and be consistent. That's at least in this kind of document. So yeah, so that's it for my internal report. So I will have a pull request with once I do a pass on the full document, but it's taking a bit longer than I expected.
Yeah. It is controversial and kind of we have to do it carefully, otherwise we'll again fall in the same trap.
Antoine?
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
maybe Anton can let's revisit Anton's pull request then now.
Yes, so I assume everyone is looking at the diff from the
Yes.
file change from the pull request. So I did try to change all of the Schultz more or less, even some of the ones that are not in the standard sections. So the first one, yes, just basically
First one
obviously you
I'm
must.
okay. I have some problem with first. Well, yeah, okay, let's go sequentially.
Yeah, we're
141.
going to go, yes. So 141, I think, is not controversial. You must
Yes.
authenticate and authorize according to policy. So I think that's kind of harmless. Second one is more controversial. So this is about what are the mandatory DID methods for interop.
Sorry,
So-
which one in what list? I want to make sure I follow the details.
So that's line 334. We are looking at the diff of pull request 95, which is in the chat.
Okay. I see. So are you looking at the diff, not the comments on the diff. Okay.
Yes. So line 334. So before we said all transparency service implementation should support DID web. Obviously, this is like a fancy thing. We have to decide what must be implemented for interop. And I think in this case, DID web is the only one that I think has some consensus to be implemented by everyone. So I changed that to must. So if anyone disagrees, let me know, because I think it's impossible to say that there is no mandatory to implement DID, because otherwise there is no interop at all.
No, I'm actually not convinced. Sorry, Antoine.
Okay.
So assume you are doing supply chain where you have a very strict notion of identity. Then I think it's completely okay to pick another DID method. And with a must, we are requiring that DID web be accepted as a valid way of signing.
No, that's not what it means. So being
I know, but
supported.
it is a bit. My view is that each transparency service must specify the DID method
No.
that they support, and the fact that DID web is one of them, I think, is a bit much.
Okay, so let's discuss that. So
yeah.
So there is a difference in the implementation supporting it and deployment of that implementation accepting it. So you can configure which DID method are acceptable. It's part of the registration policy of an instance of the transparency service. What this is saying is that if you put out an implementation of SCITT, then it must be possible to configure it with DID web. That's really what it means. And I think this is the only way that we can ensure that it's possible to do interop testing between all implementations of SCITT.
I think we agree on what you want to say. I think in that paragraph it suggests that if
no, it doesn't. No, so that I strongly disagree. It doesn't suggest that. It says that the implementations must support, which doesn't mean that they must use or must accept.
Which PR, which line number?
This is PR 95, line 334.
Yeah, but because just above there is no guarantee that the TS will be able to register their signed statements.
Yes.
It suggests that if the issuer picks DWeb, then it knows the transparency service will be able to register
No,
if it's not configured.
no, that's not the case. So this is about implementation supporting algorithm. This is not about any guarantee that the claim would be accepted. Again, repeating myself, you can an implementation that supports DID web can be configured to only accept DID X509 or I don't know DID.
No,
Bitcoin.
I think there is ambiguity in your
I'm not sure that's what the
statement.
paragraph says.
Yes.
One way to patch it, maybe to change line 333 to say that all transparency service will accept to register their signed statement as opposed to be able to. Because if the implementation must support DWeb, then every transparency service will be able to register if it's DWeb.
Why we are forcing one particular did method? We are contradicting line 333.
That's not the intent of that must. It's saying the implementation must support it, not necessarily that the transparency service will be configured to accept it. But with the line above, it's a bit ambiguous, I think.
Well, clearly it's ambiguous because
Yeah.
you just had this massive conversation.
Yeah.
The transparency service needs to advertise what methods it supports. There's absolute agreement to that, right?
Yes.
Yes. So.
Okay. And then there is the possibility that every service advertises different methods and none of them can speak to each other.
Yes.
And to remove that possibility, there must be a mandatory to implement method.
No, that I disagree because it will still be the case that some transparency service will be configured to reject DWeb even if they have an implementation for it.
Yeah, so that's a tautological counterpoint. Like if all transparency services need to support at least one DID method and it's the same DID method, then they can all understand that DID method. If they don't all understand that one DID method, there remains the chance that they all support different DID methods and they can't communicate with each other. And you can replace DID method with cryptographic signing algorithm or any other cryptographic interoperability code point in the protocol. If there's a chance that every service operator will pick a different value for that, there will be no interoperability in some scenarios where, you know, this guy signs with EDSA, this guy signs with ES256, and the other guy signs with ES256K. They're never going to verify each other's signatures because they don't support the same signing algorithms.
So, okay, I understand the need for interoperability or the wish for interoperability. I think it's not what Antoine said, in as much as I believe Antoine does not mean that every transparency service should take DIDWeb as an acceptable.
I agree. I don't understand what he said. I'm not going to guess about it anymore. I'm just stating what the
Let me repeat what I said because I don't like people talking on my behalf. So there are 2 points that are being made, which are independent points. The first point is that there is no guarantee that the transparency service that you use will accept your DID method, because each instance can be configured in whatever way they want. But independently of that, there is a requirement that all implementations of SCITT transparency service must implement the DIDWeb method. And it's not the same as they must accept DIDWeb signed statements. They can reject the DIDWeb statements, or they can reject all DIDWeb statements if they want to. But for interop testing and for interoperability in general, they must implement DIDWeb. That's really the requirement here.
No, but
Okay,
what
so
are you
you're-
saying that you're contradicting your own statement? You're saying as a transparency service, I will support did web, but I may reject the statements with did web.
That's
How that is
possible.
possible?
Yeah, so we need to correct the issuer terminology. There's the issuer of the signed statement and the issuer of the receipt. Antoine is trying to create a constraint that only applies to the issuer of the receipt. And he's saying a transparency service must use did web to issue receipts effectively. Is that correct?
So
No.
I think it's
No,
okay. Let's
I'm
take
not
an
clear.
analogy. It's like
No,
TLS.
no.
So in TLS, you must implement every implementation must implement some of the server fields.
Yes,
And you can still configure your TLS server to reject all
that's
of
correct.
mandatory to implement
Yes.
server fields, and that's okay. And that's the point Antoine is making. So
Exactly.
we are not going to guarantee interoperability. So it's not the case that an issuer that signs with did web is guaranteed that the transparency service will accept it.
Yeah, it's exactly the same as TLS.
Right.
Everyone must implement AES 128 GCM. It's required, but you can connect to a service and it can reject a handshake while you only offer AES 128 GCM because you have the
So
right to do that.
can we just try and say the words that we would like to see in the spec and ignore what's written here? What are the constraints you're trying to create for the issuer of the receipt?
It's not a constraint on the issuer, it's a constraint on the implementation of the transparency service. It's just saying that all transparency services must implement the did web methods for checking issuer signature.
Okay, so
it is absolutely not an issuer requirement. It's a transparency service requirement.
It's a constraint on the registration policy. Actually, it's saying.
Sorry, but
yeah, it is, because if you're saying that they all have to support verification of signed statements from did web, then that is a constraint on registration.
No. So what I want to say is that they have to implement it, which is not the same as saying that the registration policy has to accept did web. We don't say anything about what registration policy should accept or reject. It's entirely at the discretion of the instance of.
Okay, my feedback is it's massively confusing. Why are you telling people they have to do stuff that they don't actually have to do? If it doesn't matter, then don't say it.
So doesn't it? It's kind of like a boot up, minimal support to get in and start talking to other nodes. There needs to be a minimal interoperability. It doesn't mean when you're up and doing business, you need to completely support that, initial handshake kind of capability. So, you need to somehow be able to come up and start interacting. Is that what we're talking about? Is that initial?
I'm not clear what is the constraint on the transparency service, because I thought that the DD is used to identify the issuer, right?
So
there are two kinds of issuers.
When you implement SCITT, you must implement the DID resolver in order to verify issuer's statement signature. So
Simply
I
not
think
true.
we all agree to that checking issuer signature is a requirement, and it's in fact listed in the text somewhere above that you as a TS you must verify the statement signature, and you can only do that if you have a DID resolver.
That's not true. You can verify a signed statement that's signed with X509, and you can verify a receipt that's signed with X509. Now we can say, okay, like we chose not to support agility at the issuer crypto layer, and so all cozy sign 1 will be not signed with X509, both on inbound and outbound. Or you could say, we're going to support cozy sign 1 in any of the ways you can sign with cozy sign 1, inbound and outbound. That would be ISS and KID and public keys, and it would also be X509. And the thing that I think we have in places in the spec language that shows a preference to DIDs. And this is language that does that. It's specifically saying all transparency service implementations must support the did web method.
Yeah.
That is a constraint on implementations of the transparency service, and it's saying you must support did web. You could
Yeah.
change that, and you could say it must support X509 and X5C and X5U, and it would still work, right?
So I think you are mistaken. In fact, the current spec does not allow you to just use X509 signed COSI. It's not going to work. So right now, the DID is required for the verification of signed statements. You cannot just do COSI. And what you are discussing is kind of a deeper change, like allowing verification of just COSI signed statement as SCITT claims, but it's not something that is even in the current draft.
So can I interpret what you said is there is an absolute requirement on support for DIDs in SCITT?
In the current version of SCITT, yes.
Okay.
That's already the case today.
Is it controversial or is it like accepted?
Yes. No, it's controversial. I mean, but
Okay.
Yeah.
it's
the
current statute.
So there's two places that it exists, and we have to determine are both of them controversial or not. The first place it exists is on a signed statement going inbound to a transparency service. DIDs can be used there. The second place is outbound on the receipt from the transparency service.
Yes.
Or is it equally controversial that DIDs be in both places, or is it more controversial that DIDs are in one place over another?
I cannot say, but
no. So I think doing one or two, it doesn't matter that much. The requirement is there because with other approaches, we don't have a clear way of identifying the issuer of the transparency service. So
can I interpret that?
Signature, it's really for the identity system.
Correct.
And the current stance, which has triggered a lot of debate in the past, is that we pick DID as a way of identifying the parties.
Yeah. So let's just say that it's going to be impossible to remove DID as a mechanism for the identity of the transparency service. Is that a fair statement?
Or the issuers. Right now, it's built in, yes.
So
for issuer is a different thing, but he's
you need to not use the word
yeah.
issuer in the abstract here. The transparency service,
yeah.
It could have one or more identities. These are the identities that are used to sign the receipts. And I'm asserting that removing DID from that layer is impossible. Is that fair?
It makes sense, but it's not correct in as much as initially we are not using DID for identifying the transparency service. The core requirement, the most important one is, I think, how we identify issuers. And if we identify issuers using DID, we may as well use that as well for the transparency service. So that's what we did. But identifying issuers is the core issue.
Then why are we putting it here then? Because we are talking here about the issuing of, we are using DID for the transparency service by issuing
again,
the receipts, right?
The main, the high level bit is, how do we identify issuers?
But that's not what Anton's PR says.
So
no, so
the Antoine is a much smaller scope change.
My PR is just about fixing the use of should in the text. So I'm not changing the semantics of the document. I want to make it clear. Well, it's trying to clarify the ambiguous semantics at least.
Yeah, but it's
and I want to
causing
make it
people
clear
to...
that in the current documents, DID is required both for identifying issuers and for identifying TS in the receipt. That's the current status. If you don't like it, then you can create a PR to change it.
Excellent.
But that's out of scope for this discussion.
All right,
So
let's deal with that next time.
Okay,
that's good.
Based on the assumption that DID is required to identify issuer, which is what exists in the current draft, okay? The question is, are there mandatory to implement DID methods for issuers or not? And the previous text was ambiguous because it said that all transparency service implementation should support DID web. And the problem with that is that every time that you write should in RFC, you need to say when is a should a must and when is it a may. So you need to clarify what is a condition for it to be optional.
Yeah.
And my point is that to be consistent with, in fact, the rest of the text, in particular where did web is mandatory for the did transparency service identity, I changed that should to a must. So it's just like a single word substitution. But the problem is that we are kind of complaining that the text around that sentence was also ambiguous, which is true because there is a difference between implementing or mandating the TS to implement did methods and forcing deployments of that implementation to accept claims that use that method, which are very, very different. So I think I will clarify the difference between implementing did methods and registration policy that accept that did methods. But I think the core semantic effects of the change is that currently it forces all SCITT implementations to implement the did methods. Is that clear for everyone?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I think it's mandatory to support DIDs in the current reading of the document.
Okay.
No, did web.
Did
web.
web, not just did.
That's
Did-
did web, and that is that's a bit tricky because it means the transparency service must be able to do a request to fetch the HTTPS request. Which
Yeah.
is a
And
bother
there's-
in many
There's
cases.
text in the PR that addresses that already.
I think this is a big topic which we need some more audience here, because we are forcing the transparency implementation to behave in an very rigid, fixed way of identification.
No, so it's not forcing that. It's again, it's forcing the implementation of one method. This text doesn't have any impact on other methods. So it could be implementing did X509 or did whatever. In addition
No, but you
to
are
did
saying
web.
that to facilitate interoperability, it means that you are saying that interoperability is not possible if I am not using did web.
No, it's
It
saying
says that clearly,
the
334.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's
So
right.
facilitate doesn't mean that it's required.
facilitate, it's not required. So
Well, like it doesn't matter because
Yeah.
if there isn't a single identifier method that is consistently used by all parties, then I could send you a Ethereum signed statement.
yes,
You could be living in a hyperledger world and your relying party only checks things that come from X509 and there's no interoperability.
yes.
So why you want to say that? You could say that in order to support interoperability, the different transparency services must implement a same type of identification method. For example, did web. Why are you forcing a very must
Right.
support?
That
well,
would
because we have to fix one. It's exactly like TLS. TLS doesn't say that all implementation must implement one cipher suite because which one? You have to be precise in the requirements. So everyone
so-
must implement IES 128 GCM, and that's what you have.
OAuth does have a mandatory to implement algorithm. It's called ES256. It is considered, in my opinion, a best practice to, when you have this kind of behavior, to specify a mandatory to implement and
Yes.
then to upgrade it over time as the crypto ages out. And you
Yes.
see that happening in TLS still.
Yes.
Hmm.
But I think the question, like, if we disagree that did web is the right one, then we need another one.
Yeah.
So I don't particularly like did web. It's just did web
Yes.
is, by all accounts, the one that is easiest to implement.
That's correct.
But
Well-
if someone wants to require like a different one, then tell me which one you think we should be required, because I don't see really an alternative today.
You don't, I mean, is X.509 may not be the better one? Certificates, provisioning of certificates and
So
signing.
Hank asked me to evaluate
Yep.
using X509 for
Yep.
signed statements and
Yep.
for receipts, and I did, and it's possible, and you can do all of the stuff that you
Yep.
can do with DIDs with the cozy headers for X509.
Correct.
Now, we could put that in the document in excruciating detail and then really encourage people to stay on X509 forever. We can not forbid it in the document, but not comment on it and talk about DIDs. That seems to be mostly what we're doing right now. So those are the options on the table there.
Well, there is a third option, which is to transform X509 into DIDs. And that's an option that led to the creation of the DID X509 method.
Yeah, that's just doing DIDs, in my opinion.
Yes.
Yeah, but
Well-
not this web, which is one of the. It's convenient, but it's relatively weak. I think that's
The thing is that,
back
yeah,
we got. So
if you do
requiring
DID X509,
CB is bad, and we want to avoid that. I think.
so the difference is that DID X509, it has the same security as X509 sending, but with the benefit of stable name if your certificate expires. Really, that's the difference. But DID web is a weaker security. This is what Cedric is trying to say. Because the indirection of going through HTTPS is kind of not auditable. So the resolving of DID web is not auditable, which is a known weakness of DID web.
Yeah, and if we're talking about the weakness of DIDs, every part of using DIDs is weak, and you should just use X509 because it has more adoption.
Yes, I support
But
that statement.
the problem is that X509, it doesn't have stable issuer. So there is no concept of issuer in X509 because certificates, when it expires, then your identity change. So
Yeah.
that's essentially the reason that X509 is considered not suitable for SCITT because there is no stable notion of issuer.
Right. On the service provider side, you could do what OAuth does, but on the signed statement from arbitrary parties in the supply chain side, you can't really.
Yes, that's a problem. So if you use like X509 code sending certificate, and you have two people that are named John Smith, then even the common name of your certificate doesn't really mean anything. So I think it has been discussed already quite a lot. And the point of using DID is that X509 does not give you a stable identifier for issuers. And that's kind of a critical weakness, which means we have to use DID. That was the reasoning.
Okay, so if you say you have to support DIDs, we should describe in more detail what does that actually mean.
Yeah,
for
I've heard, and it is very ambiguously placed actually, because if you see, I was carefully following Anton's diff at line 334. That is actually under issuer identity. If you see, the section is line 328 section, which is issuer identity, but it is not. We are not talking about issuer in SCITT is the one who is issuing statements, right?
There's two
Yes.
issuers. There's the issuer of the statements and there's the issuer of the receipts.
Okay,
Transparency service is the issuer of the
I
receipts.
think the comment that Nagesh is making is that this requirement should be in the TS section, and I agree with that. We
Yes.
should
Yeah.
move these requirements to the TS section.
Yeah, except that you probably want it in both places because the whole point of wanting DIDs here is that for the issuer of the statements, there isn't a stable name system. For the issue for the receipt, the transparency service, there are several systems out there that will work for that kind of role. But for the software supply chain artifact producer, the guy who's making statements about his artifacts, you're really trying to say this guy really should use DID web because there isn't any other stable naming system. That's what you're trying to say, in my opinion.
Yes.
Yeah, but it is very ambiguous because if you see line 330, it says before an issuer is able to produce signed statements, which is talking about the when we talk about signed statement, producing signed statement, it is talking about issuer of the artifacts.
Yep. It's
So-
I
So,
think,
but Yogesh, I agree with you, but can you open like a new issue because we
Yeah.
are never going to go through my PR if
Yeah, I
we try to
agree.
solve the ID.
That's where I got confused with the whole point and discussion. So this is issuer of transparent statements is where it should come. And yes, okay, let's not hang up on there as that aspect. But
But
yes, I agree. We need to create a new issue for this. Let's see.
okay, so I'll let you file the issue.
Yeah.
Let's try to go a little bit further because yeah, Hank
Yeah,
is going to
yeah.
be upset if we only look at 2 lines of the diff. So what else? Okay, so there are more schulds in that section, in fact. So the other schuld that appears right after is about use of consistent identifiers for all their statements. And I expect this is also going to be like a very controversial discussion. But previously, the text was saying that as an issuer, you should use a consistent DID for all the statements that you sign. And the question there is, what are the situations where issuers may actually be allowed to use different DIDs, even though they are the same person?
Well, single, so in the case where you have regional offices, but they're all owned by the same company, but you identify each of them with a different email addresses, you know, is it sort of gets into the concept of when you use identifiers to apply them not to people, but to like entities that are made of people and that change over time. The concept of the same entity becomes ambiguous. Like, and even in the context of people, you have this problem. People change their, gender, or they change their name, they go into witness protection or whatever. They get new identifiers. So there's the identity, which defies definition. And then there's identifiers, which are easy, and you can create as many of them as you want, and they all point at the identity. They're labels for the identity.
Sure, yes. So let's try to kind of frame that in terms of statements, because eventually what is important for SCITT is that if you consider yourself one issuer, of course you can split yourself in as many different issuers as you want. That's really not the point. You can create as many aliases as you want. But the context of this sentence is when you have an issuer who wants to be recognized as the same person or the same entity, but using different identifiers. And I think there are some reasons that could justify doing that. One of the most obvious reasons is because you have different clients which support different methods, right? So I think that's kind of a clear use case where you want to allow the same identity to have different identifiers, right?
You can't take away that capability. That's like a property that comes from the mathematics.
Yes, I'm not disagreeing. So no, the question is how do we rephrase this requirements, right? I think the way I interpret it is that you want to be recognized as the same issuer, even though you are using a different DID.
I think it's out of scope.
Well,
Yeah.
it's okay. We can. I mean, that's a fair assumption. We can decide it's out of scope, and then we can delete these requirements completely.
I could tell you that, in the context of like supply chain work with governments and stuff, like you get a lot of identifiers and they're for the same entity, and you can't tell if they're legitimately for the same entity or they're fraudulent for the same entity, or what's going on there. There's policies and procedures and all kinds of complicated stuff that gets applied to that information. And for SCITT, we only need the ability to collect the information and have confidence that it's immutable and available potentially. The policy sort of in data analysis determination piece. It could be that you have a registration policy that says I need over 90% confidence that this new did isn't actually this other existing did or whatever. And there's some machine learning model you run that, evaluates that. And those kinds of policies are in general out of scope for SCITT, in my opinion.
So in
I
general,
think
go ahead.
so I think it's out of scope, or it can be excluded from the registration policy, and that's completely fine. I think from the verifier's viewpoint, it's less clear. If there is a statement about an artifact and I can't say who the issuer is, then I'm going to be stuck, right?
Well, the verifier trusts the transparency service, right?
No,
Not completely.
not fully.
Well, I'll put it this way. If I come to Microsoft and Microsoft has made transparent a Windows command line binary, and I'm about to run it, and I can see that it's transparent according to Microsoft's transparency service, I don't care who the original issuer is. I don't care if it was like the developer.
Yes, but in general, if it's a driver from AMD that is made transparent by Microsoft,
Yes.
AMD is taking responsibility for the driver, not Microsoft.
Yeah, so there is still a kind of a global importance of DIDs because statements can be registered and then re-registered.
Right, but if Microsoft accepts fake AMD drivers from threat actors and makes them transparent, the consumer is primarily looking at the transparency service first. And if the transparency service is tricked, that it is probably not the consumer's problem.
I disagree, actually.
Okay, but again, we are completely like straying out
Yes,
of.
it's not about truth. Yes.
So the problem is that we are having like disagreement about semantics rather than. So okay, so it's good that we have disagreement, but we need to file them as separate issues.
Yeah, ce sera pas as we knew that it was going to trigger lots of fundamental. Just a way of going through them, but it was.
Which issue is this attached to? This
it's a meta issue. It's an issue that is raised by who's actually raised this?
Which line in the PR, I guess, is what I'm trying to figure out what caused us to start having the question of which is more important to the verifier, the identity of the transparency service or the identity of the statement issuer.
So this is, we are looking at line 338 in the PR, or 337.
Sorry, while you are looking for this, can I ask, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I have to use a weird setup here for a dual call thing. My other thing ended. And I heard Ori say, sorry for chiming in a random, weirdo way, that is issuer of signed statement or issuer of a transparent statement. Of course, the thing is to descale trust relationships here, and therefore the transparency service is the authority. If your signed statement sucks, then it's the fault of the transparency service and not of the issue, of course.
I seriously disagree there. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but this will be how it will be perceived by the consumer. You stop trusting all the issuer. You start trusting the transparency service. That's the T of trust in SCITT here. Because the transparency that you provide and the rules that are the registration policies and some other care you take about accepting issuers, for example, as a TS, that is something people will start to trust. And while technically I agree with you, Cedric, the issuer is still someone who may lie to you. We are not here to detect liars. That's absolutely correct. The same thing is true for rats. We can't identify a lying attester. If it's willfully lying to you and it's doing all the things you have to do, then it can lie to you. That's what endorsements are for. You endorse the root of the liar, so to speak. And if you can't endorse it anymore, well, you don't. So in SCITT, we have, I think, a similar responsibility because you will stop trusting signatures from statements. You will start trusting receipts. And receipts are issued by the TS, as already highlighted, and that is something that people will start to trust instead.
I
So
think we have sort of a fundamental disagreement. So if there is no way the transparency service can be the source of authority and yet explain that the payload is opaque to the transparency service, it's not compatible.
Okay, I think we are definitely very way out of the original topic. So let's table that for next time. I think the model that Hank has in mind is kind of a valid model, and maybe in many cases that's what will happen. But
Since
yes.
Anton, one thing I would say before I close the call is, because you're touching that and trying to change the meaning, a bit of meaning about these statements, it would be perhaps more wise if you do the kind of realignment necessary as you're touching that section of the document, because otherwise it will take a very long time to kind of fit it properly into the document.
I'm not sure how to make an action out of your ask. So what exactly are you asking me to do?
It's so basically like this the sections sometimes are really out of context at the place where they are put into, and making it enforcing the should to must is in fact kind of putting them more into a controversy at some places. So perhaps this PR, when you change the should to must, if you can reorganize it in the rightful place, would probably help the discussion.
So you mean split the PR
from you
12 PRs for each of the change? Is it what you mean?
No.
Sorry, say that again.
Are you asking me to split the PR so that we can focus on each?
Not really. I didn't mean to split the PR, but I mean organizing it in the correct sections, because what I see is that this change is kind of changing the direction of the document or putting it into more controversial kind of situation.
So let me clarify something. Every change that is in this PR, it's replacing the use of shoulds or should nots. That's basically every time there is a should, either it adds a condition for when it can be done or not, or it replaces the should by may or by must. So every change in this PR is either that. It's like changing should to may, changing should to must, or adding a condition on why you can do the thing that should be done or not. So that's basically how we kind of confirm with the RFC rules of using should.
Yeah, but if there is something which is not required really, then you should not change may to must, but remove that text, as what we concluded, right?
That can't be a general rule. So
yes,
so I think
exactly.
what Antoine, so we should do this iteratively. I
Yes.
think what Antoine did is the right way to do it, and then we can have another pass of, do we really need this now? But I think that's a separate orthogonal action.
Sure.
So
Okay.
we can try to do it in two paths, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think what Yogesh is asking that maybe you want to do the second pass first, which is like
no, not first. I mean, no, not first. If you, at a particular point you think changing may to should or must feels that, oh, this section is this part of paragraph is not required, then please go ahead and change it or delete it, rather than introducing it, keeping it, and keeping the controversy, and we are discussing on something which is not really required there. So you should say when I,
evaluation after the fact. So we unfortunately, also you have to write text multiple times. So we
Yeah.
have to go through the movements of accepting Antoine's assessment, and
Okay.
then we can check does it still apply, yada yada. So that's a totally other path, and I think that's another day for us. And I'm very happy that to accept the changes as is.
No,
And
I
then
don't
go
think we
from
can
there.
accept as is. I think
Yeah,
we
okay,
already,
yeah. I mean, yes, you said, yeah, I understand what you said. Sorry, Anton, yeah, go ahead.
okay, sorry, I think we will have to continue this discussion next week because we are ran out of time today.
yes.
So I'm
And
happy
also
to
I see
continue.
there are a lot of comments on the change, even though they are just changing the should or adding the
Yeah.
qualification. So we need to resolve and we need to do another round next week.
Yes,
Sure.
so as is, I meant to, sorry for Yogesh, sorry for delaying you. As is meant, as is the action for us today. So we resolve the current action, and then we do another iteration on is this still somehow invalidated due to our result? Do we need this anymore? And I think most of the text is still valid, and I think we Yogesh's request to rearrange text portions in the body of the text is yet another thing. So so that is just for readability and for other readers' sakes. So I'm absolutely fine with doing this on all the iterations. Waste some time on the rearrangement and waste some time on validation of text still valid. So we actually have good text at the end, and that's absolutely fine to do this way.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. See you next week. Bye.
Bye.